it has just become clear that the war between the United States and Iran has entered a new, more dangerous, and harder to control phase. What is changing now is the use of FPV drones, those small, cheap, and precisely guided devices which are now being used to target American equipment. Outside Iranian territory in the last few hours, images released by Shiite militias linked to Iran showed attacks against targets in Camp Liberty in Iraq. Among the equipment hit were a Sentinel radar and a Black Hawk helicopter used for medical evacuation. This raises serious alarm because it shows that the risk is no longer just in the sky with missiles and planes, but is now also very close to the ground, in bases, yards, and poorly protected areas. At the center of this new situation are Iran, allied armed groups in Iraqi territory, United States forces in the Middle East, and the Trump administration itself. Now, in the midst of the escalation of the war, and precisely at the moment when Washington is trying to talk about a ceasefire, this has the greatest impact in Iraq, in the Gulf, around the Strait of Hormuz, and throughout the network of American bases, embassies, and facilities in the region. The message is strong. Even without a direct ground invasion of Iran, American soldiers, radars, helicopters, and logistical centers remain vulnerable. The most serious aspect is how these attacks happen. FPV drones are not giant weapons. They are small, fast, hard to detect, and can cause significant damage at a low cost. If used in greater numbers, they can put pressure on more expensive and slower defenses. The problem gets worse when equipment is left exposed without protective screens, without cover, without physical barriers, and without clear adaptation to this new threat. That's exactly what the images suggest. Bases are still operating as if this were still the old kind of war, when in fact the battlefield has already changed, and changed in a brutal way. That's the heart of the problem. For years, the biggest concern in many conflicts was rockets, missiles, and bombings. Now the threat also comes from simple drones, launched by smaller groups, often at points where traditional defense doesn't respond in time. And why is this so important? Because it reduces the gap between irregular groups and major powers. An expensive radar, a strategic helicopter, or a support area can become the target of a much cheaper weapon. This changes the calculus of war and puts direct pressure on the American presence in the Middle East. At the same time, this new phase appears at the exact moment when the United States is trying to push a 30-day ceasefire proposal, but Iran is signaling resistance. The Iranian position is that a short ceasefire is not enough. Tehran wants a broader solution tied to its own strategic objectives. In practice, this shows why the crisis remains unresolved. On one side, Washington talks about victory and tries to open space for negotiation. On the other, Iran says it still doesn't see a basis to end the confrontation this way. The result is a clash between political rhetoric and military reality. This contrast becomes even stronger because Trump claims that the war has already been won, but the facts show a more confusing picture. The Strait of Hormuz remains under pressure. The talks have neither a confirmed date nor location, and there is a growing impression that the negotiations may also be serving to buy time. As additional forces arrive in the region, there is mention of sending about 2,000 soldiers and the approach of an amphibious group with Marines. How can this be seen as preparation for more military options if diplomacy fails? And why does all of this matter so much? Because this war is no longer just an exchange of attacks between countries. It is spreading through indirect means, through regional allies, and through technologies that are changing the cost of conflict. If FPV drones become a regular tool in this war, the impact could go beyond Iraq. Bases, convoys, radars, diplomatic facilities, and even supply routes are now under constant threat. This doesn't guarantee victory for either side, but it makes things much harder for those who thought air superiority alone would solve everything. Another key point is the warning from experienced US military personnel. Their concern is simple. Success in attack is not the same as controlling the political outcome of the war. Bombing a lot doesn't mean ending the conflict. Destroying targets doesn't mean stabilizing the region. And now, with cheap drones hitting expensive assets, this contradiction becomes even more exposed. The question is no longer just how many targets were destroyed, and it becomes something else. What was actually resolved? What happened? Of course, the war has entered a more widespread, more unpredictable, and more sensitive stage. In places like Camp Liberty, around Baghdad, in the Gulf, and on routes connected to Hormuz, such as with drones. FPV, indirect pressure, refusal of an immediate truce, and ongoing military reinforcement. And why? Because each side is trying to improve its position before any real agreement. The result is a serious warning. The war hasn't diminished, it has only changed form, and this new form may be even harder to contain.